In Pit Lane, brought to you by Online Invent, and with thanks to our Platinum Star Patreon supporters. Of course, we've all seen the success of Shane Van Gisbergen after his incredible debut win on the streets of Chicago last year in NASCAR, and of course his move up to full-time NASCAR racing in 2024. We know that it's been very popular over here, but what about in the United States? Well, it seems that he's captured the public's imagination. Racer magazine, a very prestigious publication, recently had an article which claimed that he was, quote, a breath of fresh air, a much-needed breath of fresh air for NASCAR racing over there. Well, do other people feel that way? What do Americans think about Shane Van Gisbergen's move to NASCAR? And also, what might it mean for Australian drivers looking to move to NASCAR in the future? Last week I had the opportunity to catch up with Samuel Stubbs. He's the host of the podcast, the NASCAR podcast, Below the Yellow Line. And I started off by asking him whether he thought Shane Van Gisbergen was, in fact, the breath of fresh air that NASCAR needed.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the program. But you talk about SVG, you talk about a breath of fresh air. He's about as big of a breath of fresh air as you can get, right? Coming over from Auckland, New Zealand. Who's ever heard of Auckland, New Zealand here as NASCAR fans? I know I hadn't before SVG came over. That Chicago win, watching that last year was, I've been watching this sport for over a decade now. I've seen a lot of incredible moments. I've cried a lot of happy tears. I didn't cry when he won that race, but I just kind of sat there starstruck, dumbstruck, right? Because you have a guy that has never raced in a NASCAR stock car before. There's only one driver. His name is Marvin Burke. He won at some random short track in the 50s. He's the only other driver beside Shane Van Gisbergen, I believe, to win in their first start. I might be wrong. Maybe Johnny Mance, some other people did it. He's the first one to do it in quite a while.
I think Mark Donohue might have won on debut from memory.
I think you're right. You're right.
He was the other one. He was the other one. I mean, that's not a bad name to emulate.
No, sir, not at all.
The interesting thing was, I think I speak for as most Australians and most New Zealanders is, of course, at that time, I mean, when the race was running in Chicago, the races, if it's a Sunday afternoon race in the States, it's early Monday morning here, and I got up about 7:30 or something, and so the race was more than halfway over, and I thought, I'll see how it's going, and I turned on the television here, and he was back in about 18th spot. And then sort of 2 laps later, he was 15th. And I think everybody in Australia went, yeah, he's going to win this. And, of course, he did, because we've seen it 1,000 times before, but, in races over here. But I suppose the big challenge for him, of course, for this year, for the full year, is going to be ovals. And so far he's acquitted himself surprisingly well. But how big a challenge do you think that's going to be? I mean, because obviously, street circuits are his bread and butter over here. There's quite a few of them in the Supercar series. Whereas even for the experienced NASCAR drivers, it was a pretty new experience. But how do you think he's going in terms of getting used to the ovals?
I think he's doing about as well as you can expect somebody who has never really raced on a NASCAR oval before to do. Last year, I believe his only start in a national series of NASCAR, the Top 3 series, was a Truck Series start at IRP, and he did pretty well. He finished, I think, around 17th, 18th spot. Of course, the only bad thing probably about him winning that Chicago race is that you have all these expectations placed on your shoulders, right? All of a sudden now, everybody expects you to be the next Richard Petty, the next Dale Earnhardt, the next Mario Andretti. They think you're going to go out there and beat everybody. I think the thing that everybody forgot is that, hey, he's still new. He's incredibly talented. He won that first Cup race, but cut the guy some slack, right? It's not like he's going to go out here and take every checkered flag he sees. He has the talent to do so. He just might not have the experience yet. So this year, when you look, the one thing that's been really impressive to me is just how well he's taken care of the race car. In the Las Vegas race in the Xfinity Series, he had an engine issue early, I think maybe like 20 laps in, and he ends up finishing almost last. But you look at Daytona, you look at Atlanta, the super speedways, the drafting tracks, he did very well there. He finished top 5 at Atlanta. That's not an easy thing to do. He finished 6th at Phoenix, which is not a drafting track. That's not a track where the draft equalizes the field. That is a driver's racetrack. That's a track where it's all car, all driver, and your result at Phoenix is going to be an indicator of how well you ran. And he did very well there. This next weekend at Richmond, and then I think the weekend after that at Martinsville, it's going to be very telling, I think, of how well he is acclimating early. Richmond is a racetrack. It's a driver's racetrack, right? It's a track where tires are going to wear, especially that race being run at 1:30 local time. It's going to be hot. Sun's going to be beaming down on a beautiful Easter weekend. So that's going to be a big race for him. And then Martinsville, which NASCAR fans call it the short track. It is a track that tests your patience. It is a track that tests the durability of your race car. It is a track that tests your ability to keep your tempers in check, because you're going to get run into at Martinsville. If you ever have a clean car leaving Martinsville, you're going to have every car owner in the garage lining up to talk to you, because it's near impossible to do unless you stay at the front all day. And that's everybody's goal, right? So if SVG can come away with a top 10 in one of those races, or even, top 15 in one of those races, or both of those races, if he can show that he can stick around with some of the top dogs, which is what he's done so far this year, that's a very good indicator. And then you look at other tracks like your Charlottes, your Kansases, your so-called cookie cutter racetracks, right? Because they all kind of look the same. They all race different, but they all kind of look the same. If you look at those tracks, if he can just do his job, keep the car clean, finish top 10, top 15, those are going to turn into top 5s, and your top 5s are going to turn into wins. So it's difficult to really predict things in modern day NASCAR, because modern day NASCAR is about as crazy as you can get, especially on some of these ovals when you have late restarts and fuel strategy and things. But I think SVG is doing just fine right now. And I think if he just keeps doing what he's been doing, keep the car clean, control what he can control, he's going to have a pretty good season on the ovals. And then on the road courses, who knows, if he does as well as he did at COTA on Saturday, he might just win the rest of those altogether.
That's one of the interesting things, I think, from an Australian viewpoint, and for people who don't know. I mean, yes, we do have one banked oval. It hasn't run for years out at Calder Park. It's been well over a decade since that pretty much closed. But there's certainly little knowledge with the general public of oval. And when we say about getting used to oval track racing, it's not a generic thing, isn't it? I mean, as you say, every single oval is completely different. And saying, oh yeah, he did really well at Daytona. He's got the ovals aced. Then he's got to go to somewhere like Darlington or Richmond or somewhere like that, which is Bristol, which is so totally different again. And I think that's one of the things he's really enjoying at the moment, because Shane loves, we know Shane well, and Shane loves a challenge. And I think that's one of the reasons why he seems so happy at the moment. And let me tell you, I mean, the Shane Van Gisbergen we're seeing in America at the moment, anybody who's dealt with him in the Australian media is currently sort of looking and saying, who is this doppelganger for Shane Van Gisbergen? What have you done with the real Shane? Because he seems so relaxed. He hates doing media, and yet suddenly he's popping up on podcasts, and he's joking, and he's relaxed, and he's happy. So he seems he's in a really good place at the moment. So what does this mean for his success for other Australian supercar drivers? Do you think this is going to sort of get to other teams, looking out and saying, well, let's have a look at these supercars and see whether there's anybody else over there, like a Brody Kostecki or someone like that?
I think it will. And, you mentioned Brody Kostecki, and he came over and ran the Indy Road Course last year for Richard Childress Racing. I believe he's running a couple races for them again. And I completely agree. I think there are going to be some NASCAR team owners looking at some supercar drivers. And I don't know how you guys feel about this over here. And I say this as someone with not a lot of knowledge about supercars and how, teams work over there. But if I'm a team owner in the Australian Supercar Series, I'm hoping my driver's the next Shane Van Gisbergen, but I'm also not hoping my driver's the same Shane Van Gisbergen at the same time, right? Because you want a guy like Shane who's going to go out and win just a slew of races each and every year. You want a guy that has a championship pedigree, that has championship level talent behind the wheel, but you also don't want your driver to get poached by NASCAR, right? I think that's kind of how his team, maybe feels. And I'm sure there was some mutual agreement there of, hey, I'm going to go, race NASCAR in the States. And Shane seems like a very nice guy, very good guy. I'm sure that wasn't a very messy split. You guys probably know much more about that than I would. But I think it's absolutely going to lead to maybe, I don't want to use the term exodus. I feel like that's a little extreme, but there might be a driver in supercars that decides to come over. I know in the mid to late 2000s, we had in NASCAR what we called the open wheel invasion, because it seemed like every F1 driver and IndyCar driver that was kind of getting phased out over there wanted to come join NASCAR. You look up on the running order for the Daytona 500 one year, and you'd say, oh, what's Dario Franchitti doing here? Just out of the blue. And I think we could see something like that in supercars. Now, NASCAR isn't as big of a draw now. It's not as popular now. It's not the flashy thing in pop culture like it was in 2007, as it is in 2024. But I think we could see that. I'm not sure it'll be as on a big of scale as you could see it maybe back in the day. But I think it's certainly possible. And to any supercar drivers out there listening, we love to have you, because of bringing in guys like Shane, like Brody Kostecki. It introduces NASCAR fans, to other racing series, just like, Shane coming over here has introduced you guys maybe to NASCAR. Maybe you weren't watching NASCAR before in Australia. Maybe you are now. So it introduces fans to new racing series, and we're all race fans at heart. We all love racing, whether it's a car going 10 miles an hour, in a street race or a car ripping 190 around the high banks of Talladega. We all love racing. So it's good for fans. It's good for the sport, and it's good for the drivers too, because they get their name and image and brand out there to more people. So I think it's a great deal for Shane and for supercars, for NASCAR. I think it's a great thing for all the parties. The team owners might not agree if their star driver goes and leaves and goes, halfway around the world. But I think as a racing fan, I think it is a very good thing for all parties.
The interesting thing now is the cars. I mean, they're not similar. Okay, we're racing Mustangs and Camaros over here now, but that's about all they have in common, and they look very similar. But there are some sort of technological breakthroughs. You mentioned Richard Childress. He was out here last year for Bathurst, for the Bathurst 1000 with the Erebus team with Brody Kostecki. I won't go into the whole Brody Kostecki saga. I'm not sure whether you're aware of that at the moment. So I don't know what the situation is involving Brody. Brody is sitting out the championship here far this year for rather dramatic reasons that we, as I said, we won't go into for legal reasons and all the rest of it. But so I don't know what the situation is with the Richard Childress. With the Richard Childress drives, because that was very much part of the plan for this year. And Brody, of course, going back even before his supercar career, did do some NASCAR style racing in America. So it's always been his passion. Unlike Shane sort of developed it sort of late, but Brody from the time he was a teenager has said, I want to race NASCAR, which is a bit unusual. So he's certainly got the talent. Just quickly, before we wrap up, I mean, just on the on NASCAR in general, what do you think what's the season looking like over there so far? Who do you think is the guy to beat this year? And what about for the next couple of races? What should we look out for as we're watching on here in Australia at some ungodly hour of the morning?
Well, we appreciate everybody watching in over there at some ungodly hour, like you mentioned. It's always great to see on social media, some fans, and I think Shane's been a big part of it, seeing a fan say, it's 4:30 in the morning and I'm up watching NASCAR. I love this sport. I really do, but I'm not sure if I'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning to watch it, but that's besides the point. You mentioned what we could expect for the rest of the season, and I have two words for you, and that's William Byron, right? He won this past weekend at COTA. He has won the most races with the next generation of car, this new car that we've seen NASCAR debut in 2022. He's won 10 races with it. Nobody else has hit double digits. He's been the first driver to multiple wins every single season in it. He just dominated at Circuit of the Americas. He won the Daytona 500, the biggest race in stock car racing. So, Richmond, Martinsville, what we could expect there. He was very good at both those tracks last year. His teammate Kyle Larson won both the spring Richmond and spring Martinsville races last year, but I think it's going to be a Hendrick Motorsports fest, at least for this early part of the season. Now, NASCAR usually always has a dramatic shift from one part of the season to the next. You'll usually see one team dominate the first few weeks, maybe the first couple months, and then you'll see another team, another manufacturer come into the mix. So I think William Byron, Kyle Larson, with NASCAR having this playoff format, this one race championship format, it's impossible to predict the champion or who the favorite is. We all try to do it because, we're media. We need something to talk about, right? The one big storyline that I don't see enough people talking about, though, if you're wondering out there, what's the storyline of the NASCAR season? The executives at the Ford Motor Company are pacing the halls of Detroit, Michigan this weekend. They are pulling their hair out. They are losing hair. They're gaining new wrinkles. Ford has not won a race, not just in the Cup Series. They have not won a single race in Xfinity, Truck, or Cup this year. That's worrying. That's really worrying. They have the defending champion, Ryan Blaney. He's been the best Ford so far. He's third in the points, but you have a two-time champion, Joey Logano, sitting 22nd. He doesn't want to match his number there. He does not want to match the number 22 in the point standing. So Ford is worried. Toyota dominated the last couple weekends before Circuit of the Americas, whipped the field at Phoenix, whipped the field at Bristol. I think Joe Gibbs Racing versus Hendrick Motorsports, I think that's the story this weekend at Richmond. I think it's the story next weekend at Martinsville. And I think it's the story for the rest of the season. They have all the heavyweights. They have Byron. They have Larson for Hendrick. They have Hamlin. They have Bell. They have Truex. And, this 21-year-old named Ty Gibbs, and yes, he is related to Joe Gibbs, the team owner there at JGR. He is a phenom. He is the future of the sport. Nepotism or not, man, daddy's money or not, he is the future of NASCAR. So it's going to be a really fun season. I say that every year. I love the sport. It's always a fun season. It could be the worst season ever, and I'd still love it. But I think you're in. The first 6 races have been great. TV ratings have been up. The racing product's been great. And we still got 30 weeks to go. So it's going to be a really fun season for SVG and all the rest of the guys out there on the racetrack.
Well, thanks for giving us your insight into Shane's career over there and the way things are going. As you say, very early days yet, but it seems like at the moment that he's absolutely in heaven over there right now, in racing heaven. As I said, he's always been the sort of person who loves the challenge, and I think he's basically done everything that he could possibly do here in Australia. And this has probably given him a whole new lease of life. So at least for the foreseeable future, he'll be just absolutely thrilled about the various challenges over the year. Hey, listen, thanks a lot. First of all, for viewers at home on watching us on In Pit Lane, give your podcast a bit of a plug. What is it? Where can people find it?
Yes, sir. So our show is called Below the Yellow Line, and you can find us if you want to go on YouTube. I finally made it simple. You can just type in Below the Yellow Line. You'll see me pop up. It'll be a little dark circle, and it'll say Below the Yellow Line. I have a little colored yellow microphone in there, and that's me. You can find us there. We'll have coverage of every single NASCAR race. So that's for Truck, Xfinity Cup. We'll have pre-race shows, post-race shows. We got a ton of really good interviews coming up, and we're not just interviewing people from NASCAR. We're interviewing short track drivers, Formula 3 drivers. We just got an interview done with IndyCar driver Christian Lundgaard. We have some Indy Next drivers that we're about to have on the show. So we're interviewing executives, drivers, whoever from around the racing industry. You can also find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, which is now YouTube Music apparently, and Apple Podcasts, all there below the yellow line. So that's where you can find us, and YouTube again, just at Below the Yellow Line. Just look us up there, and you'll see my face.
Hey, listen, thanks, Sam, for joining us on In Pit Lane. Really do appreciate it. Hopefully we can catch up a little bit later on in the year as well, because there is certainly increasing. There's always been an interest. We've always covered NASCAR on In Pit Lane over the years, but it's always been sort of a niche market over here. But I think with Shane over there at the moment, I mean, there's a familiar name and a familiar face. Certainly when Marcus Ambrose was over there, we went through a bit of an interest spike over here, and now that Shane is there, even though he's a Kiwi, I mean, we have a tradition here in Australia. You're a New Zealander until you start winning, and then you become Australian. So we're claiming him at the moment, but. Thanks for joining us. Good luck with the show, and hopefully people watching In Pit Lane tonight will catch up with it. And if you're looking for IndyCar drivers, talk to that Scotty McLaughlin guy. He's a pretty good guy. Tell him that In Pit Lane sent you, and he'll have a chat to you. Not a problem.
Yes, sir. I'll do that. Thank you so much for letting me come on the program, and a big hello to all you racing fans out there in Australia. And if I'll tell you this right now, if you don't like NASCAR, if you're a little sheepish about trying to watch it, hey, give it a shot, SVG or not. I promise you, it is a show, and even if the racing on track isn't great, there's usually some drama. There's usually some beef on pit road afterwards, maybe even a fist fight or two. I know that's a little redneck, but maybe even a fist fight or two to keep you guys entertained.
No worries. Thanks a lot, Sam. Thanks for joining us in Pit Lane.
Yes, sir.
Get the phone ringing for your business with website development and SEO services from Online Invent. Visit onlineinvent.com.au.